Welcome to Healthy Buzz, the podcast for women who are craving honest answers in a supported community. Hosted by Brandy Homerding, a certified nutrition therapy practitioner who believes your body isn't broken, but the narrative around women's health is. Each week, we're diving deep into holistic health topics, challenging the one-size-fits-all approach, and empowering you to trust your own informed intuition. Get ready to feel seen, supported, and seriously informed. This is Healthy Buzz, where collaboration meets unfiltered transparency in women's health. If you have ever felt like you're doing everything right, the organic diet, the supplements, the 8 hours of sleep, and yet you still feel like you're hitting a wall with your health, today's episode is for you. We often talk about the narrative behind like our bodies being broken, but today we're going to look at the actual blueprint of your body. And for this conversation, I'm joined by Dr. Kathryn Heidt. And we're going to move beyond the idea that our genes are a death sentence, and instead we're going to look at them as a highly sophisticated user manual. Today, we're going to discuss how functional genetic testing is the missing link in what your wellness journey may need. Dr. Kathryn is a functional practitioner who sees many highly complex, sensitive, and I've been there, done that, it didn't work type of cases. She prioritizes patient education to help ensure autonomy and empowerment in one's healing journey. Having worked in the fast-paced, high-volume functional clinic to start her career, she saw firsthand how vital the foundations of health are and has evolved her career into a niche area that focuses on functional genetics, mast cells, and histamine intolerance. She also does work with fertility, autoimmune disease, and much more. Dr. Kathryn, welcome to today's show.
Hi, thank you for the intro.
So I would first like to dive into your personal story. I know I've heard your story before, but I feel like that is so empowering and enlightening as to why you got so involved in like the functional gene side of things.
Yeah, for sure. And I love jumping into the story side of it, the symptomatic story sharing as opposed to my background and education. It's so boring when I turn on a podcast and I'm like, all right, get through it. I get it. You're smart. So yeah, let's just dive right in to when my world just imploded, right? I was practicing in the functional space. I had my own practice at this point, and I just noticed I would get these rashes and they would show up at different parts of my body. Now as a child, I dealt with some skin symptoms. That's kind of one of the reasons I became more holistically minded, even in my younger years, was because I was allergic to so many things that I had to figure out, like parabens, and there were parabens in everything. I feel like that was one of the first things we woke up to and said, oh, paraben free, paraben free. I am genetically prone to manifest my symptoms on my skin, right? So plugging in some genes there. But I know that as long as I controlled certain exposures, I was fine. But I noticed that I couldn't control these little rashes that were coming up. They were kind of sneaking up my neck. My lips were reacting. And it just got worse. And I was like, well, I'm stressed. Well, it's this. Well, I've been eating more gluten lately. You know, I made all those kinds of excuses. But we had also recently moved into a new home. And 2 months in, I had my first big flare. We were eating breakfast. It was Christmas Eve. And I just remember being like, my face got hot, like a big flush. And I ended up looking in the mirror. My husband and I were both like, what in the world? My eyes were swelling, you know, like a full allergic type reaction, but it was mostly rashing. What would happen over the coming years is that I would get these reactions every few months, and every time it was worse and would last longer until the point where several years later, I was pretty much just living in a state of what was diagnosed as atopic dermatitis all up my neck, on my cheeks, my eyelids, my whole face had been involved. Doing everything I know to do. We had a mold inspector come out and he didn't find anything. It's a whole nother side of this. Hire the right people to do the job, people who get it, who actually recognize that mold can make people sick. They're going to do a more thorough job, but he gave our house a clean bill of health. And so I said, well, it must be parasites, so I did more parasite work, which helped. Granted, a lot of the things I was doing definitely helped, but it kept coming back. And in my belief, what I think of with patients and myself, it's like, okay, if we're actually fixing something, we should be restoring this dysfunction in my body. And so when it just kept coming back, we finally got a second opinion on the mold. And sure enough, we had toxic mold, chytomium, in several rooms of our house. So I moved out and we fixed all that. But even coming back home, I wasn't flaring anymore, but I still had these lingering symptoms. I couldn't quite heal. And it was so infuriating to me because it was very clear that the mold was causing these major flares. And so I wasn't flaring, but I just had this baseline of like this ugh type of feeling. Like I had the flu all the time, but like just barely, right? And my skin was 90% better, but still very much visible. I mean, hello, it's my face, so it was still my eyelids, my lips. I was still reacting to a lot of foods. I was still reacting to things if we traveled. And so it took me the next 6 months of doing other things and then just like staring at a wall and being like, what's next? And finally, I did a functional genetic test and saw that my detox genes were just really junky. One of the biggest areas of that for me was through glutathione and being able to actually regenerate usable glutathione, which is your body's strongest antioxidant. And so every time that I was trying to support liver detox, I was making it worse because I couldn't pass through phase 2 very efficiently. And so I would end up making things worse and even flaring from the support I was trying to give myself. So that was one of the first moments where I just said, that just changes my entire perspective, because I started glutathione and 2 days later I was clear and I wasn't reacting. I could travel without flaring. It was night and day. And all the other stuff helped. All the other stuff mattered and still matters, right? Wellness. But that was my key. I had to find that in my genome and be able to support that very specifically. And I live symptom free now with that being a tool.
I bet so many people can relate to that, where they do a healing journey, they see improvements, and then it seems like a couple steps back, right? Like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes people are taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back, and it's like, oh, I'm so frustrated. Why can I not get over this hurdle? And it sounds like understanding your genetic disposition helped you to understand then how to really support your body through that.
Yeah, just how to get more precise. You probably understand that in the functional world or the holistic world, glutathione is a little bit villainized because of how many people react negatively to it. So I never tried high dose, right? I only tried it in little amounts because I was so afraid of making it worse and getting myself in more of a tailspin. So I always kind of shied away from it. And now, I mean, I use it left and right in the practice too. And I just don't see the issues that I feel like we were trained to expect. But we do have to be careful because certain people can get too much stimulation from glutathione, headaches, heart palpitations, things like that for sure. But if we see the genes and we see indications for that, I am jumping into it, and I've not had anyone have negative issues with it so far.
Yeah, that's amazing. So many people can hear that the word genetic testing and they might get scared. They might think that, oh, this is going to tell them something that they can't change, that maybe, can be rooted a little bit in fear-based for sure. I often think of myself when I hear genetic testing, people are thinking like around cancer type stuff. So can you explain the difference between like our fixed DNA and epigenetics, and why your genes are actually a conversation and not like the final say so and like this is your destiny?
Yeah, exactly. And I do hear that as well when I bring up genetic testing. It's a mixed bundle, but some people don't want to know if they're at higher risk of this disease or that disease. And I totally get that. So the reason I call it, and it's not even really a thing to say functional genetics, but I like to say that because it distinguishes disease genetics, right? Diagnostic genetics, and truly like physiological genetics, how your body is functioning. I don't necessarily mean functional medicine genetics, but true physiology, right? And so two very different sides of our genome. And when we're talking about this area over here, we're not talking about disease states that are like cystic fibrosis, right? Or a disease that you have and you are diagnosed with because it's that way. You were born with that. It is that way. We're talking about these SNPs, and without getting too into depth here, we're born with all of these genes that make these enzymes, and whatever our body needs, we upregulate and downregulate as needed. But when we are born with them, we can also be born with different versions of these genes that can function more or less and not result in diseases. Okay, so that's where we're testing over here. We're not testing for disease states. This can inform us about some risk factors. So on this panel that I run, the Alzheimer's gene is on it, which is the ApoE2, 3, or 4, or the 3 possible alleles. You get 2 copies. The 4 one's the one we don't want. So if someone has a 4-4, that does tell us about increased risk genetically of Alzheimer's disease. But the difference of these two arms here is that it doesn't mean you have it, right? It doesn't mean you're going to get it either. Whereas the disease genetics means, we found it, we diagnosed it, like Ehlers-Danlos, right? That is a disease that we test for to confirm and then we diagnose, versus histamine intolerance. That's more of just a functional perspective on now how we can get precise on your body's specific needs there.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So, can you explain a little bit more the term epigenetics for our listeners?
So epigenetics would mean the changes over time to your genes. Now, we don't go in and change, like let's say MTHFR. If someone has MTHFR, I use that one because a lot of people have heard of it by now. If you have that, if you have a SNP, a variation on that, then you have that. Okay. But the epigenetics tells us, are we more or less expressive with that gene? So just because we have a gene and we have a faulty version of that gene doesn't mean that it's always on full load, right? So it doesn't mean that it's always just go, go, go. Our environment, and we'll get into this, of things that affect what increases or decreases the function of that gene. But that's what epigenetics is to say that, okay, we all have an MTHFR gene. Okay, first of all, we all have that gene. So it's funny when I'll get an email maybe like once a quarter now that's like, I have the MTHFR. I'm like, yeah, me too. What's up? Like, we all have genes. We all have pretty much the same genes. We just have different versions, different SNPs, different variations to these. And so if we have an MTHFR that's the one that's dysfunctional, right? So we get methylation issues. The epigenetics means that it's either more active or less active. And that's where we can actually intervene.
Yes, so helpful the way that you explain that, because I think a lot of times people think like genetically speaking, my family has like these patterns of like high cholesterol and diabetes and things like that. And so they're like, it's just my genes and I'm going to have that too. But from what you're talking about with like epigenetics, there's different things that can make that be more expressive or less expressive once we understand the genes that are maybe affecting that quote unquote disease that people get diagnosed with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you work with people who often have seen it all. They've tried it all. They've been there. Literally, they have thrown every piece of spaghetti at the wall to try to understand. So like for the women who feels like they're doing the work and they're not seeing the results, how does genetic testing provide that validation that they're struggling with, that maybe it isn't just all in their head, but it's actually your body's biochemistry that is actually contributing to them not seeing the results?
Yeah, I love the word validation here because that's exactly what it is. It empowers us, okay? Because like we said, we then can get really precise on, okay, how exactly can we support this pathway here? Of all of the thousands of things that we could do to try to get you well, and now we can really narrow it down and get very, very precise, okay? But the validation of that is just to say, yeah, girl, this is an uphill battle for you. You line 10 people up with the same general diet and the same general environment, and one of them might be really sick. This is classic with mold exposure. I work primarily with women, but one of the cases that stands out is a man, and he was the sick one in the family. 3 kids, man, wife, and he was so sick, and everyone was like gaslighting him, like, do this, do that. Why are you lazy? And all this kind of stuff. Mold wrecked him. And so he needed a lot of neuro work. He needed a lot of other work, but the genes genetically made him more susceptible. And so it was an uphill battle for him. The validation I think that genetic testing can give, we don't start there, right? We look at that and we kind of go, okay, that makes sense. Cool. And then the empowerment comes from, well, now let's build that plan to actually address this with a little more precision. No spaghetti noodles and no run-of-the-mill functional protocols that help one person and not the next. It's kind of this hit or miss generic stuff. Hopefully most practitioners out there that are listening especially are ones that are individualizing their care, but individualizing it based on what, right? What information do you have? We've got our clinical skills. We do have our blood work and other testing, but I am so much less on the other testing now because the genetics really allow us to understand how to apply things without doing a lot of the other fancy tests. And it's been really neat.
That is like really empowering, I think, for people to understand. I think about that man that you talked about who lived in this home and he was having the issues with mold, but probably nobody else in that home was, right? And we see that often. Often it's the other way around, where women are experiencing more of the symptoms and nobody else in the family is. And then I don't know about a bunch of the clients that you work with, but I know for myself, I can tend to gaslight myself and be like, are you really experiencing that, Brandy? Or is that in your head? Are you sure you need to be doing that? Or are you making that up, right? Like, I'm really good at gaslighting myself sometimes too. But to understand that like you can be in the same environment and be like consuming the exact same things, having the exact same exposure to whatever, and your body, your genes are going to impact the way that your body responds to those different things.
Yeah. And how it can use the supports that you give it or not. Some of the support we give the body could actually be making things worse. And it could be because we just are backlogging this pathway because we can't get through here. So in the situation of MTHFR and methylation issues, the wrong situation with B vitamins and someone is ill. They feel terrible. But the right situation with the right methyl donors, we can get through that pathway as opposed to just butting up against it and flooding backwards. The visual I give people all the time is like a damming system, right? We've got the river, but if we've got dam structures, that water is just hitting that and creating tributaries elsewhere. And that elsewhere in physiology spills back into the bloodstream, and blood goes through the brain, it goes through the gut. We get inflamed, sticky, gunky blood that then carries nutrient poor materials. And so we just get this whole feed forward aggressive loop when we're trying to overcome a pathway, but we don't have the precision level information to actually support it the way the body needs, which usually is much gentler. Less is more if we can get really, really precise on that.
Yeah. Wow. So we are living in 2026, which is wild to me, but our terrain, our body is facing a lot of different challenges that we didn't even talk about like a decade ago. So what are the biggest things that you see are negatively impacting our gene expression? And then are there specific modern stressors that are also compounding that?
Yes. Just, yes. We're sicker than ever, despite, I think, a lot more awareness of living a generally healthy lifestyle. And yet people are still, like a lot of people that come to me by now, they're doing a lot of the stuff, the stuff that 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago was enough. And people felt miraculously amazing by taking gluten out of their diet, even just 50%. Or dairy free, and it just changed the world. And now it's like, well, I did all that, and what's going on? And we have this epidemic of people with histamine intolerance issues, which can relate to a lot of the GI issues that we have, a lot of IBS, bloating, reflux, brain fog, anxiety. So the mood aspect of that, the skin intolerances, food reactions. We have so many things that so many more people have so much worse of a version of. So yeah, I think that unfortunately the environment around us, and I don't want to be cliche here, right? Of just, it's poisoning us, but it's so new to our body's physiology. We just don't have the right mechanisms in place that we've adapted with over time to figure out the rapid increase in bioaccumulation of all these brand new chemicals that our body just has never seen before. And yes, the pushback here from the more medical side is, well, your body detoxes anyways. Well, of course it does, or we'd all be dead. Of course the body works and it knows what to do. But it's being given all this new stuff that we've made in a lab that's now flooding the environment and combining in who knows what ways to make whatever new chemicals. And sure, the dose in this one product wasn't enough to hurt you, but now we have this bioaccumulation issue. Our body is storing it in our fatty material, whether it's our fat cells, our brain, organ level, whatever it is. And so we store these things in our body, and yeah, we get dysfunction. I think just the education piece there is not meant to scare anyone. It's meant to give us the awareness of, hey, we're going to control what we can control, and then let the rest just be life. You just can't be perfect at this stage, at this age and time. That's my opinion. I am way on the side of balance, 80-20, because also stress, hello, we don't want to add too much stress to it all and make it all worse anyways. But yeah, the environment is a big one. The environment and chemicals that are there, and they're infiltrating the water supply, our food supply, the air. We're just being exposed to things. And if we don't know, then we don't know to do just simple stuff to take the edge off, like filter your air, look for mold in your house, right? Pick cleaner products, cotton products, as opposed to all this polyester that's out there in our clothing. I just can't do it with workout clothes. I've tried. But that's the balance, right? The day to day, let's go cotton, work out, polyester. I didn't say that. But the more aware we can be, the more we can pick and choose and help control those variables.
Can we dive into the topic of mold a little bit more? Because I know that that was part of your journey. I had mold toxicity as well when I lived in Denver. Now I live in Seattle. And so everybody's like, oh, everybody in Seattle's got to have a mold issue, right? But ironically enough, I had an issue with mold in Denver, where it's not here in Seattle. So what would you say are some misconceptions maybe when it comes to mold, and what impact is that mold having on our health?
Yeah, so I think that some of the conversation around mold is a little bit overrated. It can be overrated because look, mold is everywhere. There's probably mold right there in my windowsill. I just noticed it earlier in my office. Mold is everywhere, and it's part of our natural environment. And that is something that's not new to us. The issue is for sure toxic mold, right? So there's certain strains of toxic mold, but also how much of a non-toxic mold you're being exposed to. So a little bit of mold growth Or you ate a blueberry and realized that if 3 blueberries over had a little bit of mold on it, okay, no big deal. But if you consumed too much of that at once, or you're breathing too much of that at once because you have a leak in your shower you never knew about, so now your floorboard's all moldy. For years, it might not be enough to really go past this threshold that your body can handle. It kind of goes back to that accumulation side of things too, right? A little bit is fine, but then over time, you're more and more exposed, the mold's growing, releasing more of those mycotoxins, and then you're more stressed here, there's other things going on here, and there's other variables that just fill your cup too fast, and then boom, you spill over. So a little bit overrated in the sense of, I don't think we can very often blame mold as the end all be all. Toxic mold, yes, it's always a problem. Too much, yes, we always want to find the source of moisture and why it's grown, right? But we're never going to be mold free. It's just there. And that's fine. That's part of our natural environment. That's okay. But the awareness and being able to take proactive measures of just making sure that we have things in the house to either a dehumidifier, so we control moisture, things like that. Just doing basic things like our issue was our windows were leaking and it leaked underneath our carpet in the rooms. And so we got rid of carpet, little things like that that could hide leaks. You can hire people to come in and do this. I think that the field there's environmental biologists, I think are the ones. They come and they help kind of fortify your home, whereas a mold specialist comes in to specifically look for mold, right? So kind of different. So yeah, it could even having a specialist come by and just make sure that you're doing everything you can to keep your house very mold limited, cover your crawl spaces and things like that, because that's a big issue with mold coming from, again, the moist soil.
And I think too, like some misconceptions that people have is when they say, I have a new build, I don't have a mold issue. And I'm like, that's not always the case.
No, and new build, cheaper, porous material that sits in the rain and then they go and they just block it in. So, I mean, come on, guys. We see how fast they're putting up houses everywhere. Like, you can't tell me that they are crossing their T's and dotting their I's. Some of the worst mold situations I have seen in my patient population are new builds. There's also the old homes that were just bound to be mold somewhere because it's 100 years old. But the newer builds are the ones I would actually have my eyes on first. If I hear someone moved into a house built in 2022 and they've had issues and they call it long COVID, I'm like, is it long COVID or is it mold or is it both because they potentiated each other? So it's definitely the new builds. That's a big misconception for sure.
And I would say too, even like when I lived in Denver, a drier environment, I had mold exposure. Our basement flooded. We had to rip up the carpet, all that stuff, get rid of that. And then we traveled and we had a dog sitter and they didn't realize that the front faucet was dripping into the house. Like they didn't turn it off right. Something happened. And so there was all this water that had came in a window as well. And we also had to live in our basement for a couple months. It was finished basement, but we had to live down there because we remodeled upstairs. And so I think it was just too much exposure at one time. And then I look at too that I worked at a hospital at the time that was quite old. And like now looking back, there was always the water stains on the tile. There was humidity issues in one of the room. And I'm like, I think my system was just too overwhelmed and was not able to detox properly. So then, probably thinking I also probably have some genetic issues going on with that impacts my detox pathways. But when your detox pathways are compromised, then yeah, you're going to have that backup and you can't detox and fight the mold exposure that you are being exposed to.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think that mold, again, in some cases, it can be the biggest trigger, right? I think in most situations, it's just a destabilizer and it just adds to all the other junk that our bodies are handling until it's just too much. We all have an analogy that pops to mind for that of just like a rough day, right? And you're just running around doing all the things and then one little thing and then you like explode on someone. It's like, okay, you've got your threshold. Well, your body, your physiology, your biochemistry has its threshold and you're constantly lowering these things down because that's how your body works. It's detoxing for you all the time. It's doing a good job. But if we have genetic alterations to that, right? It's kind of wonky. It might work a little bit slower or your threshold could be a lot lower. And so it just doesn't take as much to make you symptomatic. Whereas other people might be pretty resilient to certain things. And so as they fill up and ebb and flow and their body's taking care of things, they stay asymptomatic for the most part because their threshold's higher. So yeah, I think that mold, a lot of times, it's just taking advantage of a lot of other things going on. And this is where I mean that it's overrated, but not, right? It is important, but it can't stop there, right? It's not that mold is the big enemy. Of course, we don't want toxic mold. Again, I don't want people to take or add words that I'm not saying. It's a problem. but we have to still be holistic about it, right? We still have to look at everything else. Are you doing the basics to give your body a chance to detox properly? And this will get into a little bit maybe on the side of how our behaviors and other things are affecting our epigenetics positively or negatively. But yeah, we really have to think about it in terms of those thresholds and where we're at in overall health doing all the other stuff to then manage other exposures like molds or viruses, just things that we can get sick with, right? That just derail us. If we can talk about COVID for a second, I think that one of the reasons so many people who were super healthy got so sick is because they weren't as healthy as they thought, right? The body is kind of managing as best it can. So we're not like flooding up here of the oversaturation of symptoms. But biochemically, physiologically, I look at wellness labs all the time. People come to me and they're just like, yeah, let me just do a functional panel. And I'm like, oh, you pre-diabetic, your cholesterol is high, your CRP is a 12, like what's going on? And they're like, I don't know, I feel great. They're not overweight, they're healthy, they're young. And I'm like, this is proactive preventative care, right? Because they're resilient, but they've got a lot going on. And so sometimes we blame age, right? The bioaccumulation and I hit 40 and now I'm symptomatic. But yeah, all those things matter too.
Yeah. What impact is stress playing on the manifestation of the epigenetics, turning on and making things be more expressive versus not?
I think if there is one thing that changes, that lowers this threshold to symptoms being above, managing symptoms being below, I think if there's one thing that lowers that down, it's stress and trauma. And this is another conversation for another day, but I think we've minimized what trauma was. Little micro traumas, we're strong, we're good. Big girls don't cry. And men too, right? We can't cry. We can't release these things. And so we internalize these things. And that contributes to chronic stress, chronic dysregulation. Even if you're having a kumbaya day in the sun, you have repressed things, you're holding them in, and you're just wound tight. I always think of like a rubber band broken onto a string and then like wrapped really tight around a pencil. We can't let that go. Our system, our physiology, our nervous system is constantly holding that super tight so that we can still go about our day and don't have to think about that. But it's really wrung tight. And so again, that really brings that threshold down. We're friable. We're easily sent over the edge if we get exposed to something like COVID or food poisoning in Mexico or mold or whatever it is, right? So stress and trauma plays such a big role because of the HPA dysfunction. We get all this dysregulation. Brain to body is the crux of that issue without getting too much in the weeds there unless you want to. But we get this communication brain to body. The brain is sending these neurochemicals down and trying to get the correct message sent back up. I always talk about it like a game of telephone, where if you imagine a bunch of kindergartners lined up in a messy hall trying to play telephone, that message is not the same. It's just not receiving the right signal back. And so when the environment is more messy and discombobulated and there's all these other signals, that message brain to body is just disconnected. It's not communicating properly. And so that threshold lowers because everything becomes friable at that point.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I work with a lot of clients who will be like, I'm doing the therapy, I'm doing this meditation thing, I'm doing acupuncture, and like, is it even making a difference? When they think about their whole stress situation, I'm like, I mean, yes, it is making, because what would you look like if you weren't doing those things, right? Like, yeah. But on the flip side too, I have some clients in mind that I'm like, oh, they would be a perfect candidate for some of this genetic testing, because what are we missing in the overall picture that maybe is not helping them move the needle to where they want to be?
And allowing those things to have even more benefit, because all the things that you mentioned are so important, but are they really landing and helping build a solid foundation? Or are they just barely able to get in to help manage whatever's going on? And I think that if we can get that whole well-rounded approach to it, then stuff like that is where the true wellness maintenance is, because that's when it can land more. It can build a stronger foundation for these people. But if we're just running around, our physiology is so whacked out otherwise with other variables, things that we're not aware of and that we can't control necessarily, then those things, it's just an uphill battle.
And I think too, like, people need to recognize that stress is not just your life being threatened by like a bear or an intruder in your house or something like that. Like, stress is how your body is detoxing, what your gut health is like, what your mineral status is like. The world around us is very stressful right now, very triggering, right? And like, how is our body responding to those stress signals also matter.
Yeah.
Hey, Healthy Buzz community. Have you been curious about using a continuous glucose monitor to unlock powerful insights to your metabolic health? Imagine seeing in real time how your body responds to different meals, different workouts, and also the effects of stress. Now, what if you could experience those benefits without being locked into any type of recurring subscription like some of the other continuous glucose monitor programs out there? With my Blood Sugar Savvy course, you'll get exactly that. You'll receive access to 7 engaging learning modules, 2 continuous glucose monitors to start your wellness journey, plus 4 weekly one-on-one video strategy sessions with me where I'll personally guide you to understanding your CGM data. We'll work together to identify your unique blood sugar patterns and create customized strategies for better energy, mood, and overall well-being. Oh, and by the way, this is especially crucial during your peri- and postmenopausal years. Blood Sugar Savvy is about understanding your body on a deeper level, implementing practical strategies, and gaining sustainable knowledge to support your overall health and wellness. Ready to get Blood Sugar Savvy and take control of your metabolic health? Healthy Buzz listeners can save $30 simply by using the code BUZZ at checkout. Your personalized blood sugar journey starts now. So we've seen people who have gotten like these massive 50-page genetic reports, and they can probably feel really paralyzed by all of this. So how do you take that data and turn it into a collaborative health plan for somebody that actually feels sustainable and supportive rather than just another list of rules?
The test that I run does give a full report and all that kind of stuff. And I pretty much say, I'm not going to look at that. I just want the SNPs. Just give me the data, because that report doesn't know you. It doesn't know what you've already done. It doesn't know that you've tried the B vitamin and you still felt bad because of other variables, despite MTHFR, right? So a lot of these generated reports, I just scrap. I just say, nope. Ignore that. We know you. We know your symptoms. We know your goals right now in life, right? Are you trying to get pregnant? Are you trying to come off birth control? Are you going through perimenopause? There's so many other variables that this test report doesn't know about you. And maybe the biggest thing, what are your blood markers showing us? Because when we talk about the expression of these genes, having these genes line up, that's one thing. Being able to look at these genetic SNPs, okay, they're there. Maybe they look terrible. Maybe we're like, oof. But a lot of them have an outcome in the body. They help make something, or they help accomplish something that we can actually then test in the blood to see how dysfunctional that gene really is. Meaning, is it more or less active? Is it controlled or out of control? And so that is where we can actually get an insight into functional epigenetics through the actual blood work. Like homocysteine. If someone tells me they have methylation issues, I'm like, damn you. Let's look at that homocysteine. Let's test B12. Let's look at MMA. Let's check these other variables that actually tell us if you're methylating properly or not. And so, of course, we want to use functional ranges, optimal ranges, and not ignore something that's like right here, right? But that's where I always will pair blood work with genetic work with my patients. That's a really important step that we don't want to overlook.
Can you explain a little bit about the functional range that you just mentioned and how that differs from a conventional range for the listeners?
I prefer the term optimal ranges just so we don't get too locked into this like functional medicine world, like whatever. It's getting a bad rap for legit reasons online, I guess, but we'll just call it logical medicine from here forward. So looking at the numbers to get these ranges that are on your general reports, those were tested in sick and healthy people, men, women. We do have some variables with age. If you test, I think you're less than 14 years old or elderly, that kind of stuff. The labs will change their measures a little bit, but they don't change it from the age of 20 as a female to the age of 65 as a man. Our ranges need to be bio-individualized. For age, we need to understand, okay, who is this person and where should their markers be? And the range is often a lot more narrow. But on the simplest of things, if the range is, let's take homocysteine, right? On the labs, homocysteine, I think on the base panel goes 0 to 24, something like that. I know it's 0 to something. Well, if something could be 0, do we want it all the way up to 24? Are we going to call 23.9 normal? Well, they would, right? The medical system would go, no, you're in range. What do you mean? You're in range. I look at that and I go, what? You're like halfway falling off a cliff, but you're fine? Like, that just doesn't make any sense. So we have an optimal range that we want to get that less than 7. Some people let's say less than 5, something like that, but a lot lower on that range. So that's just an example of it.
So this sounds like, to me, the ultimate biohacking, where you're actually getting, this is specific to me, and now I know the things that are actually going to work well for my body versus like trying these random things. And I think this is really important that you do, is that you're actually connecting the person and their symptoms to the actual data that you're getting, because oftentimes that is being missed. Let's say even I do a GI map test, a stool test often. People can be within normal range for some different things. And I'm like, but is that contributing to your symptoms? And I have to think about the person sitting in front of me and the symptoms that they're presenting with and how that correlates to the data that we're getting. And it sounds like you do a lot of that as well, of like, okay, this data tells me some information, but it doesn't tell me the actual person attached to the data.
Yeah, I think that's where the art of functional medicine is really lost, is people get too dogmatic on print a report and list every little marker that's the slightest bit off. And I think people used to really get into that and love that. From the receiving side as a patient or client, I think that it was just, the world was so new in terms of looking at things that way. But now there's so many imbalances in every panel that I get back in blood work. I'm not going to do that to someone, first of all. I look at the things, and what I like to do is tell them from the start, hey, these are the big areas that we're seeing. All the other stuff that I may not make note of is contributing or related indirectly to our big topics. Let's talk about these big topics today. Maybe it's functional hypothyroidism, where your T4 is fine, but your T3 is tanked, right? So we found that. What could that relate to? The gut. So what are we talking about with the gut? We'll look at your inflammatory markers, right? So you really have to tie all that together, like you said, to the person. And I ignore markers now. Even on the functional side, I don't do that. I never really did that. I don't give patients that type of framework. I literally just use the labs from the generated report, and I give them what's coming to mind for me, because I don't want them getting lost in some of that. Because if everything improves, but this one marker was right there still, I don't want them to get discouraged from that either, because it just, the body's dynamic. It doesn't really work like that. We're looking at patterns is the biggest thing. Patterns and trends and the change over time of those things, not the exact dogmatic, it's got to look like this to be right. Give me another $500, take another 10 supplements. Oh, we've just gotten too far in the business side, I think.
Yeah. So that does bring up a good question. Like, what role are supplements playing in somebody's genetic report? And how is that versus lifestyle, nutrition, and environment? What does that look like?
I tell people to ignore the large part of the report, right? Because I want to look at the SNPs. I am typing out their report in terms of how it relates to them. And then at the bottom, because it's the least important, maybe the most important, just the symptoms, but I want them to understand first. And then we come to supplements, right? Because the supplements are helping us accomplish a mechanism. It's a tool. It's a means to reach an end, right? And so I do like to separate supplements in two categories. One is going to be wellness style. And this is stuff that you will benefit from for life off and on. I certainly don't believe that everyone needs to take 2 grams of an omega-3 for the rest of their life. But someone who might have the ApoE genes or cholesterol genes, yeah, you'd probably benefit from that more than not. So take it for a few weeks, break for a few weeks, right? Or we have the other side of that being mechanistic supplements, stuff that we want to use to target and correct something objectively that we can actually see, and subjectively you're actually feeling better. And then that's a start stop. That's more of like a protocol. Let's do this for this amount of time. This stuff's just wellness. So the genetic work gives us a lot of that general wellness support, but using the gene information, I get people off of a lot of supplements that they were currently taking, because it's just these broad multivitamin type stuff. I'm not a huge fan. I always know what's trending because I start seeing it in every intake form. It was creatine there for a while, where it was just like creatine. Creatine was a couple years ago now. And then I was like, TikTok, there it is. Or colostrum. Colostrum got huge there for a while. Thank you, Armra. You did a great job marketing. Is it beneficial? Well, sure, in the right setting. Otherwise, it can wreck someone's gut. So it's just, just getting really personalized on that. And sometimes it's the genetics giving us information. Sometimes it's just listening to a conversation and being like, wait, when did that start? Is that also when you started iodine? Just, is that your anxiety? Just little things like that, of coming at it from as many angles as we can.
I love that. In addition to the nutrition, like the supplements things, are you also giving them like any lifestyle or nutrition recommendations too, based on their genetic report?
Yeah, anything we can think of, it's going in my notes, my recommendations. And when it's really involved, I will tell people this is meant to be like a 2-year learning journey for you. We are going to spend time on this report that I've painstakingly typed out at 5 a.m. for a very long time, because I want to info dump. I had a teacher in high school who would say, look, gotta let the horses run. And then some people want to walk, and that's fine. But I want to make sure that people get that information. If they want it, they've got it, right? And they can learn at whatever rate they have the capacity for, because we're all different seasons of life, right? A mom of 5 has a little different time on her hands than me with dogs. So I try to give a lot of information. And so when we get into like the neurochemistry, like COMT, MAOA, dopamine, genetics, all that kind of stuff, that's a lot of lifestyle. That's being able to tie in specific goals of, okay, well, this is probably what's driving the anxiety. Let's not just go to ashwagandha. that's overrated at this point. A lot of people have tried it by now and it doesn't do nearly what we were told it was going to do. So let's try to modify this with lifestyle, circadian rhythm. If there's nothing else that people take away from this conversation, I feel like we've said a lot, but the circadian rhythm, you have to be aware of it. You need to learn about your 24-hour clock and you need to respect it. Wake up around the same time, try to go to sleep around the same time. Of course, I'm not excluding people who have sleep problems, difficulty with sleep, but you try to pattern it as best you can behaviorally, doing the right things in the first 1 hour of your day, the first 5 hours of your day, and the right things at the end of the day so that we really support this rhythm throughout the day. That is one of the most important things in terms of lifestyle that any report will give me, and then we can get really specific on it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I think I beat that drum as well with my clients around the circadian rhythm. And I'm like, so many people have bedtime rebellion because they were doing too many things for too many other people throughout the day. And then they didn't ever carve out any time for them. And then they think that bedtime is their time. And so then they're scrolling on their phone too late. They're just watching TV too late. And they're like, I didn't have time for myself today. I'm like, well, we need to find time for you during the day so that you can go to bed at a good time. Your body needs it. You cannot heal and see progress if you're not sleeping.
100%. That deep sleep is truly when your body is healing. And melatonin coming up with deep sleep, melatonin is your body's strongest anti-inflammatory. It's not a sleep hormone. It's an anti-inflammatory neurocompound. But when you say it like that, right, it's like, oh, but again, we don't want to exclude the people who are like, but I can't sleep. What do I do? First of all, don't stress more based on that. There may be very real reasons for that in lots of detailed ways, but also, is it just your screens? Is it your LED lighting? Is your brain just being bombarded so that it's being forced to be on high alert and it takes hours to finally calm down at 2 a.m. when you can finally fall asleep? So yeah, circadian rhythm and all the directions that we could go in there, it's so important. And it is either promoting good or bad epigenetic changes. It is expressing genes or calming genes down. Regulating your circadian rhythm, your sleep-wake cycles, has a play on your genes and how they're expressed.
Yeah. So I think that brings up the next point. Like, what are the empowering things that people can do? 2 to 3 simple things, because we don't want to overwhelm the listener, because everybody's going to be like, oh my gosh, I need to go and I need to do this and that and this and that. And that's going to stress your body out. And then you're going to feel like you're failing because you didn't get to do all of the things. So let's say 2 to 3 simple ways that somebody can help speak nicely and kindly to their genes to encourage healing and resilience rather than disease.
Yeah. Well, so the first thing I'll say has to do with the circadian rhythm, but it's hydrating at the right time. So it's not just sipping throughout the day. I tell every single patient I work with, I want you to have between 60 and 80 ounces by noon. Anything over that, you're just kind of sipping. You shouldn't need to hit more ounce goals by the end of the day. That could be one of the reasons that you're not sleeping at night. If you're peeing at night, it's either you drank water too late or other things, or histamine, right? We think of things like that with bladder. But I have my patients start their day working up to 40 ounces of water within the first hour, which means that you go to bed with a big jug of water beside of you and you start drinking that and it becomes habit. In the morning, if I wake up and I have forgotten that water, well, first of all, that doesn't happen, because if I'm like already in bed and I'm like, Matt, my husband, I'm like, oh, my water. And he's like, oh, so he goes and gets it because he knows I have to have that. I roll out of bed and I have to have my water because it's just ingrained now. It's a routine. So hydrating at the right time of day, I think, is really important because it helps you set yourself up for that circadian rhythm. Okay. A lot of people have a hard time getting themselves going. So they're, people are listening and they're like, okay, great, but I can't wake up in the morning. I just feel super lethargic. If you can crack your eyes and start chugging water, room temperature water, then let's see how that goes after a couple of weeks. Try to kind of work into some retraining there. So water in the mornings, I think, is just really underrated, and it's so simple and it's basically free. This doesn't go buy like a vibration plate for $150 and stand on it, until you're itchy and needing to stop. But let's see some other things. I think more people are aware of this, but we might also need to kind of start reminding people. How things like come up in waves and then people forget about it and come back around. But we can't underestimate the importance of our chemical exposure in our home. So this is choice, right? This is, what are you purchasing? What are you bringing into your home? At the very beginning, we talked a lot about those exposures, right? In the environment that we want to be aware of, but control what we can control. And you can control the candles that you buy. You can control the Glade plug-in.
Oh, please get rid of the Glade plugins.
Get them out. We can control a lot of the things that we purchase, right? And that we bring into our homes. So makeup, your deodorant, your shampoo. Think about it. People get overwhelmed with this, especially if it's like, oh, this doesn't work. I have to try the next one. Think about it as a journey. I dove in when I was like 22, living in Alabama, getting my master's, and I just went grease head. I was like, I'm done. I'm doing everything at once. No deodorant, no shampoo. It was bad. And I joke about that now, but I'm like, oof, please don't do that. Don't be a me. First of all, 15 years later, we have way better products than when I was first looking at new things. But take it as a journey and try to make it fun, right? You're going to try this, get a sample here, there, but our products and what we put our money on to then bring into our house to then expose ourselves to, that's a big one that we need to just be a little more on top of there.
I would say too, like start replacing things as they run out. Like we're not saying go overhaul everything because that could be really overwhelming and financially a bigger burden, right? So as things run out, what are we replacing it with? Do you have like, because I know there's different apps out there that you can check out to see like cleaner versions of skincare, home care products, things like that. Do you have an app that you use or recommend to your clients for that?
Typically, I'll recommend people just run it through the Environmental Working Group database. So what is that? EWG.org, I think. They have a skin deep database and then a cleaning database. So if you run things through there, don't take it at surface value because they do a grading system. Open it up and just see what they say is maybe a little bit of a yellow or red. That still gives it a good rating, but you kind of find your own boundaries with certain things too. A good company, a good product may list something as fragrance or oils or something like that. I've seen a number of things on there that are rated like a B. And when you look at it, the only real issue is their fragrance. But if you know the company and where they're sourcing their oils, then it's like, okay, well, that's not a problem. Don't have fear around it or perfectionism. And that's where the journey comes in, like use things until they're gone, then try to replace something. And if you read that one day and go, oh, wait, that's not as clean as I thought it was, fine, use it out, try the next one.
And I will say too that marketing is very good. There's a lot of companies that claim clean things that are not, in fact, clean. So we have to think about what their definition of clean actually means and then run it through the Environmental Working Group. That's a really great place to start. Anything. You can look up most every product and they will have a rating system on there, and then just understanding. Get curious.
Yeah, get curious. And again, I've heard some people, they don't love the Environmental Working Group platform. And I'm like, it's a good starting point still. And then as you get more curious about this product or this, you can find other recommendations or just find people that you trust. DM me. I'm wide open on there. Just message me and I'm going to say, oh, this is a shampoo I'm using right now. It gave me dandruff, or, talk to people. We need these communities of just honest people, that it's not just an affiliate situation of like, oh, this is the best ever. You should buy it from me. And maybe it's not even half clean, but yeah. So talk to people, use your databases, just get curious, like you said.
And I think just like with doing a genetic report and learning what works for you, you're also going to respond differently. What works for me for skincare may not work for you for skincare, but it's a starting place. And so you start, you try, and you're like, this sucked. Don't want to buy this again. Then let's find something else. It's going to make a difference in the end, at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. If I had two more things to add to that, it would be what we've already really fleshed out, which is the stress component. But also to tie a little bow on that, it's more the comment of try to recognize what you will allow to stress you out too. I joke that half of what I do is actually being a therapist. And that is not to minimize true therapist. Okay. I'm not licensed, but so much of what I do is just like, tell me more. Oh, let me hear you. And then sometimes calling it out of like, okay, was that a big deal? Or did your emotions make it a big deal? Can we mitigate this? Can we modify that reaction? And sometimes it's just learning that, oh, wait a minute, I do have control over how I respond to that. And how you respond to that will either build or diminish the situation, right? So some of it is just a little bit of self-awareness there too. But then the last thing, we can't overlook diet. And I'm not talking about a perfect diet. I am not talking about a gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, blah, blah, blah diet. I'm talking about less processed, local when possible, organic when possible. And sometimes that's affordability and sometimes that's accessibility, but less processed, meaning that if you're going to have some cheese, buy the block cheese. But if it's already shredded, it's got a bunch of binders and gums and things like that that help keep it shredded because cheese wants to congeal. right? Unless it's a crumbly cheese. Yum. But find things that make you happy. I think that food should also be part of the joy in our lives. So sometimes people need to be in a restricted place for a short time. I had to be there with my food reactions with the mold, but I knew it was a season and that's what got me through it. But in general, my goal for everyone is to have a very well-balanced diet, a very well-balanced ability to eat and have their cake too, right? Eat your broccoli, but we like fiber, we like protein. I like dessert. So I want people to have that balance, but my dessert is very different than it used to be 10, 15 years ago, right? What that means to me now might be a Sweet Loren's cookie or a gluten-free brownie, things like that, that you just make different choices because it's less processed for me. It's less additives. I can still enjoy things, but it's more so looking at the food as what else is in that though? Because your body has to break it all down. Once you chew it and swallow it, it's nothing but chemistry. What chemistry are we presenting to our gut that we can maybe make a smaller list for?
I love that. I love that a lot. I think, that's a lot of what I do with my clients too. Like, how do you feel when we're eating certain foods? What is the signals that your body is giving you? And how can we be a little bit more intentional with what we choose to fuel our body with without having such big restrictions that you are kind of like this all or nothing situation? Because we do know that when you restrict completely, you can oftentimes go the exact opposite way and rebound and not feel good. Well, I love this conversation. Is there anything else that you want our listeners to know when it comes to a functional genetic report?
Even if you feel pretty well, like let's say a lot of people have done the holistic care or whatever, and they've gotten to a place where they feel a lot better. I think the biggest benefit with functional genetics is actually more of the proactive, preventative health side. So maybe that's the comment I would leave us with. There's really those two categories, the super sensitive people that we can't figure it out and we need to find those little bingos, but also the folks who they feel decent. They're doing a lot of the wellness stuff and they want to be proactive on their health in a very precise way and not just take the basics, omega-3 multivitamin. Genetics are for everyone.
Amazing. Well, how can our listeners connect with you? Where can they find you?
My email is foundations@drkathrynheidt.com or just Instagram. I'm very present. I'm very visible there. That's the benefit of not having a huge account, because we still talk to people, but it's dr_Heidt. So Dr. Heidt, last name or email. Website is drkathrynheidt.com.
All right. We'll put all that in the show notes. Go connect with her, follow her. She has really great content on Instagram. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Brandy.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Healthy Buzz. I hope this conversation has left you feeling seen, supported, and ready to take the next step in your health journey. Love what you heard? Make sure you subscribe to Healthy Buzz so you never miss an honest conversation. And if you found this valuable, please take a moment to leave a review. I truly appreciate it. For exclusive weekly tips and holistic strategies, be sure to subscribe to my weekly newsletter. The link is in the show notes. Remember, this isn't just nutrition, it's permission to trust your body. I'll catch you on the next episode of Healthy Buzz.